An Aegon's Conquest TV show would honestly never work. All it would be is a single man child with nightmares about ice zombies burning everyone who disagrees with him with the equivalent of fantasy nukes. You know what 40k really needs? A bit more fantasy injected in there. That's why today, we're gonna be getting some dragons. Say hi to blood and cheese, hold your sister wives close, and mount your dragons, because today we're building House Targaryen. In the early years, House Targaryen was little more than a petty power in the Grand Empire of Valyria. Located in the eastern sea of the Valyarian Peninsula, the Empire of Dragon Riders ruled most of the world uncontested. Unfortunately, as their empire grew, so did their depravity and cruelty. Practicing dark sorceries and blood magic, the Targaryens would embrace the darkest aspects of their culture and society, pushing the heights of their achievements and magical capabilities. Eventually, however, this empire would collapse with the reasons not being fully understood. Only that at the height of their power, the chain of volcanoes known as the 14 Flames all erupted. This event would become known as the Doom of Valyria, and see to the death of all the Valyrian dragon riders. Now, what caused these 14 flames to erupt isn't fully understood, but if I was to hazard a guess, I'd say it was all Bloodraven's fault. Now, normally 14 volcanoes all going off at once would result in the death of an entire culture, but the Targaryens were not normal, and that's because they practiced incest. Well, incest, and they were known to have prophetic visions. You see, a young girl named Daenerys the Dreamer foresaw the doom of Valyria, and got her family the hell out of there. Which is a pretty logical response if you ask me. Now, how did she have this vision? I honestly can't tell you, but if I was going to guess, I'd say it was Bloodraven. Am I going to keep making that joke? I don't know, why don't you ask Bloodraven? So, before I become another Thrones tuber, let's get back to the lore. Following the doom of Valyria, House Targaryen would settle the volcanic island of Dragonstone. Family, alongside their supporters, dragons, and unpaid interns, would go on to live in safety and security for the next 3 generations. This period of time would be known as a Century of Blood. Although, contrary to popular belief, the Targaryens did not remain isolated during the entire Century of Blood, as on one occasion, Aegon Targaryen actually helped save Westeros from invaders from across the Narrow Sea, earning their respect and fear from many of the noble houses across Westeros, proving himself as both a competent commander and potential ally to the people of Westeros. This would begin Aegon's conquest, and while it's presented as a merciless conquest wherein all who faced him were killed, that's not exactly true. While Aegon did have control over 3 dragons, Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes, he did not rush to unleash them. Instead, he offered every house, greater or lesser of Westeros, a chance to join him willingly, allowing those who surrendered to stay in power or even rise in social status. It's actually because of him that the Tullys, the house that the Cairn of the North belongs to, was actually able to rise up and become Lords Paramount of the Trident. Now, as for what happened to the former rulers of the Riverlands, that's an entirely different story. You see, Lord Harren built the largest castle in Westeros, Harrenhal, and dared Aegon to try and take it. The castle was so large a small army wouldn't just be needed to man it, but they could live comfortably throughout the siege. With walls so high no man could even climb it. Aegon, however, chose to fly over it instead, before unleashing hellish dragon fire. He literally cooked the soldiers and lords alive within their own castle. And when he was done, he found a nice clearing and watched the towers melt. While the Targaryens can be both merciful and generous, should you cross them, or worse, try to challenge them, they'll burn you alive in your own bed. Although this aspect of their culture would eventually destroy them, as we'll see in the Dance of the Dragons, which we'll cut to now. Look, I'm not going to cover the 104-year reign of the Targaryens, since if it was important, there'd be a show about it. Also because the Dance of Dragons is where the Targaryens' power in Westeros is really tested. Beginning initially as a succession crisis between 2 equally valid candidates for rulership, the Dance of Dragons would devolve into a full-blown continental civil war that would not only tear families apart, but weaken the Targaryens' hold on power, leaving them both without any dragons remaining and most of their house dead or crippled. In short, the events we see in Hot D aren't just cool battles, we're watching the historic fall of a once impossibly powerful dynasty and the death of a culture. Now then, with all that out of the way, let's begin by covering their methods of war. So, while most of you would be quick to say that Targaryens had no methods of war, or at least none aside from breathing fire at people, that's not exactly correct. In fact, we can see throughout the Targaryen history, even as early as Aegon the Conqueror, that Targaryens actually try to use diplomacy and politics before going to war. And even when they do, not only do they lead from the front, but they also do so from the backs of giant fire-breathing lizards. Speaking of those lizards, let's use that as a transition to cover their weapons and armor. So before we can get to the dragon in the room, I think it's important that we cover the standard weapons and armor the Targaryens used throughout history and see what we can use for that when we want to incorporate into this homebrew. First off, let's look at Valyrian steel. a unique method of forging metals that was common in Valyria. Valyrian steel is incredibly resilient and nigh unbreakable. It's also incredibly difficult to reforge weapons made of it, with only a very small few being able to actually do it. On top of that, Valyrian steel also is said to possess magical properties, being able to resist extreme amounts of damage, as well as being possibly capable of defeating and killing the undead. Or at the very least, that's what the show suggests, so I'm going to assume that's correct. Another weapon in the Targaryens' arsenal they have access to is the full force of the United Westeros, as they have access to an entire continent's worth of military force at their beck and call. And finally, the thing you guys have all been waiting for, we have their dragons. While dragons wouldn't be technically a weapon or armor, as they're more of a companion piece to House Targaryen, for this instance, we're going to be using them as a weapon, at the very least just for this argument. Now, if I was to classify the dragons as anything, I would say they are danger incarnate. As dragons, while they are incredibly powerful beasts and competent weapons in war, they are also very difficult to control, as we see with Aemon Targaryen and Vhagar, the largest dragon at the time. On top of that, the dragons are also their own form of armor, as they're capable of resisting nearly all forms of conventional weapons at the time, with only the very, very rare instance of a dragon actually being killed by conventional weaponry. So, with the weapons and armor out of the way alongside their methods of war, we can get started by finding out our goals and working on our major factions. For our first goal, we're going to need some sort of noble lineage, something for us to look back on and draw inspiration and strength from. Next, we're going to need Valyrian steel, or at the very least something equivalent to it, some form of armor that is nigh impenetrable and weapons that can shatter through anything. And for our final goal, we're going to need dragons, or at the very least some sort of insanely powerful mount that shifts the power balance in our favor. Although they also need to be equally dangerous if they're used against us. Alright, we got our goals figured out. Let's focus on finding out which major faction we're going with for this homebrew today. And I hate to say it, but we're going to be choosing the Imperium of Man. I think that given the fact that the House Targaryen actually ruled Westeros for a long period of time, 300 years in total, and was able to actually competently rule the kingdom, they better fit with the Imperium's sense of strong duty and order than chaos's grim and unceasing chaotic nature. Additionally, the Targaryens, while they do seem somewhat alien with their white hair and purple eyes, they aren't alien enough to be considered Xenos, so that's why I chose to move away from the Necrons and the Eldar. So, with our major faction figured out, let's go through our sub-factions and see which one of these best fits the Targaryens. First off, I'm going to be choosing the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, as each chapter is known to have their own rich culture and diverse history, as well as a wide range of relics and combat styles. As each Imperial Knight house is its own dynasty with its long line of histories and lineages, I think this really fits the dynastic theme we're going for when it comes to building the Targaryens. On top of that, given the fact the Imperial Knight suits themselves are passed on from parent to child, this can best fit the generational exchange of Dragon Rider to the Dragon Seeds. And for our next option, we're going to be looking at the Adeptus Custodes, as the Adeptus Custodes have some of the greatest armor in all of the Imperium, and this can best fit the Valyrian steel theme we're going for when it comes to Targaryens as well. As I mentioned before, Targaryen steel is some of the strongest stuff in the known world, and so to incorporate something similar to that, we're going to need to look at factions that have similar armor to them as well, which is another reason why I suggest the Custodes. But before I can tell you which one of these factions I chose for this homebrew, why don't you go down and hit that subscribe button like you're forging Valyrian steel. So then, which one of these factions did I choose for this homebrew, and why is it Imperial Knights? Imperial Knights really are the full package we're looking for when it comes to making House Targaryen in Warhammer 40k. They are a noble lineage of warriors who are in charge of massive mounts of fire and death. Alongside the fact they literally control feudal worlds and can summon armies of peasants to battle if need be. On top of that, the Imperial Knights offer us a secondary benefit, as we can actually use them to recreate House of the Dragon, as Knight houses are rife with political intrigue and civil wars. On top of that, the defenses of an Imperial Knight suit is incredibly resilient, able to take insane damage and punishment, which is something we can actually compare to Valyrian steel. So in other words, the Imperial Knights are the perfect fit for House Targaryen in this homebrew. Now then, with that out of the way, let's get to writing this homebrew. Hailing from the feudal death world of Planetos, the Imperial Knight House Targaryen rules with absolute power and authority. Through a combination of careful politicking and masterful military combat, House Targaryen has crushed all of its rivals on Planetos and remains the singular power in the sector. However, while their rule over the world is uncontested, House Targaryen faces threats from outside, as a malicious force seeks to assault their world and take it for themselves. The deadly warp storm known as the Heart of Winter has been known to disgorge countless demons onto the world of Planetos, regularly assaulting it in strange and unpredictable patterns. While their invasions of Planetos can last anywhere from months to decades, what is certain is that when these periods of invasion end, all of the demons seem to retreat back to the Heart of Winter, wherein they prepare for their next assault. As a result of these repeated assaults by the Heart of Winter, House Targaryen has begun conquests of nearby Imperial worlds. While this has caused tension with the Imperium as a whole, House Targaryen points to the fact that should they not take these worlds, they instead will be taken by the Heart of Darkness, and Chaos will have greater influence over the Imperium as a whole. While the conquest of Imperial worlds has raised suspicion and has led to the Imperium repurposing a number of guard regiments to assist House Targaryen in their defense against the Heart of Darkness, as members of the Astral Militarum have noticed on numerous occasions, the Imperial Knights, piloted by House Targaryen, seem to possess stronger armor that seems to emanate and radiate with an unnatural energy. While this is just simple advanced technology, or some sort of mutation caused by the Heart of Winter is unknown. However, this has raised suspicion with the Mechanicus, who are trying to dissect and uncover the secrets of the Imperial Knights, and their supposed Targaryen steel. To add to even wider and growing suspicions, there are rumors that the Imperial Knights seem to possess an even more aggressive mentality when compared to others of their ilk, as well as some sort of almost latent psychic connection that seems to form between its pilot and the knight. However, such things are merely a topic of rumor and hearsay, where there are rumors that an organization of inquisitors known simply as the Maesters are attempting to uncover the secrets of their knights, and should they find any evidence of sorcery, House Targaryen will be wiped off the map. Unknown to the Maesters is the true power of House Targaryen, as not only do they possess a wide range of Imperial Knights, they also control Vhagar, an Emperor-class Imperial Titan. Though Vhagar possesses an incredibly aggressive personality, and as such is rarely summoned to the battlefield, for rarely will it ever leave without untold destruction and carnage in its wake. And there we go, House Targaryen in 40k. I think this really fits what we're looking for when it comes to House Targaryen, as, like I said, I put all the Imperial Knights equivalent as dragons. Although given the fact that Vhagar is the largest dragon, I really wanted to include it in this homebrew, and so I thought making Vhagar an Emperor-class Titan would really fit what we're looking for when it comes to this dragon. Now obviously there are people who are going to say that this homebrew doesn't really fit canon, as Imperial Knights would rarely ever have access, if any, to an Emperor-class Titan. However, given the fact this is a homebrew, and we're trying to be fun here as well as translate the Targaryens into 40k as much as possible, I think we can afford to bend the rules a little bit and give this Imperial Knight house a single Titan, as long as we preface the fact that this Emperor-class Titan is extremely aggressive, and rarely ever will this house ever actually use it, except in the most dire of circumstances. And I think this really brings together what we're looking for when it comes to House Targaryen in 40k. Now then, if we're really going to go into depth on House Targaryen and bring it into 40k, we obviously need to get started on buying models for this faction. So, let's look at GW's web store and see if we can get a 500-point army out of knights. I know what I said. So when it comes to choosing models for turning House Targaryen into a 40k faction, I would choose a Knight Errant. I personally think it fits the dragons really well, including the fact that it comes with a melta weapon, which is pretty similar to Dragonfire, as well as a thermal cannon, which definitely fits Dragonfire, especially when you consider Balerion the Black Dread literally melting Harrenhal. The Knights Errant also has the ability Aggressive Assault, which makes them really good at doing range attacks against nearby targets, which again is very similar and indicative of Aegon's burning of Harrenhal. Now, unfortunately, as is the issue with all Knights, they are very point heavy, meaning that we are never going to be able to actually get to 500 points exactly of Knights, especially if we're going to be using Knight Errant as our poster child for Knights. Meaning that unfortunately, this army is only going to be around 405 points in total, which is pretty decent for a single model points wise. It's overall pretty poor when it comes to doing battle against full-on armies. Though Knights have always had that issue, so I mean, what are you really going to expect? And there you have it, everything you need to bring House Targaryen into Warhammer 40k, right down to the lore you need to write and the models you need to buy. That being said, though, there isn't very much I can offer you in terms of what sub-faction to pick in terms of the Knight Codex, given the fact that, as of the time of this recording, the Knight Codex isn't out. That being said, though, I did just happen to hit 100 subscribers, and so to celebrate, I decided to give you guys a little taste of what I've been working on. Because I've actually been planning behind the scenes making custom sub-faction rule sets for these armies that I cover. But because of how time consuming that would be and the fact that I only have 100 subscribers, I think I'm going to make this a challenge. So if you guys want to actually see more of these rule sets that I make, if you guys actually like them, why don't you subscribe if you haven't already and keep an eye out for when I reach 1,000 subscribers, because I'm going to make it a common thing that in every single one of my videos, I'm going to make a custom rule set that you could bring into your games to play these armies even more thematically and accurately to the lore we've written. So, to give myself even more stuff to edit this week, let's go over the rule that I created. Named Dragon Forged Steel. This faction rule allows all the knights in your army to gain a +2 to their wounds and a +1 to their toughness. While initially a very simple baseline stat bonus ability, I think this really reflects the Valyarian steel aspect, given its nigh unbreakable properties and almost mystical nature. Additionally, whenever a knight completes a certain activity or objective in combat, they typically gain the honored property and some sort of secondary benefit. And so, to better reflect the Targaryen Dragon Rider aspect and the sheer brutality of the dragons, I decided to add the secondary effect that when this army becomes honored, any weapon with the blast property that requires you to roll a number of dice to determine how many attacks you make with that weapon, you automatically add a +1 to the result. I honestly think it really fits with the thematic rules we're going for when it comes to the Targaryen dragons. So with that, that's the end of this army rule. Feel free to let me know how I did in the comment section below. Did I do better than GW, worse, or about the same? And again, if you want to see me write more of these homebrew army rules for any factions I cover in the future, feel free to like and subscribe, and make sure to keep an eye out for when I reach 1,000 subscribers. And of course, I hope you all have a great rest of your day wherever you are. I'll see you later. Bye.